Welcome to the Home Buying Show. I'm Christie Fisher with Presidio Real Estate.
And I'm Debbie Hart with Security Home Mortgage.
So we wanted to go over a few terms. If you're a first-time home buyer, if you've never gone through this process, sometimes you can hear some of these terms and go, what does that mean? So here we go.
So first of all, we're going to cover the interest rate because that's the first question that I get asked when someone calls me shopping for a home loan. What are your rates? Well, there's a lot of things that go into making up the interest rate that we're going to talk about, actually, credit scores and payment history and the amount of down payment. But basically, standard rates are across the board the same for everybody. They're set right now around 3%. Last year we had them dipping into the low 2s, but historically speaking, in the past few years they've been around 4 or 5, which was considered historically low. They've been up at 8 or 9 within the last few years, and even in the 80s they were around 18% part of the time.
Yeah, so 3% is amazing.
It's really good.
Next thing is earnest money. Earnest money is typically a down payment in the contract that you would put as a buyer to say that you are serious about purchasing a house. It can, if within the contract, there's a point if the buyer waits too long, if they decide to pull out of the contract, that earnest money would go to the seller. If the buyer goes all the way through the contract, they close and they purchase the house, that earnest money will go towards the down payment of the house. But it's really just to say how serious you are about purchasing the house.
And speaking of the down payment, that's the money that's required from the lender to show that you've got some skin in the game. If a lender is going to lend you $500,000 for a property, well, they're out that $500,000 and they have to trust that you're going to be paying back this loan. That is why we're checking credit and payment history and down payment and all of the things that show the lender that you are going to be paying them back this loan so that they're not out that money. A lot of times they don't want a property. They're not in the business of real estate flipping. They're in the business of lending. They don't want to have the property. And so the down payment is just one of the things that shows them you've got some skin in the game. Now we do have some other programs that have zero down for the down payment. We've got VA for veterans, USDA for rural, and we've got Utah Housing. And we can talk about those a little bit more in another video, or you can feel free to call me if you want to ask about those. But standard is 3% down for first-time homebuyers, 5% down for conventional, and 3.5% for FHA. If you want to put 20% down, I'm just going to jump into PMI right now. This is a big myth that people think. A lot of people think that it is required to put 20% down, but it's not. The only value that provides is avoiding what is called PMI, or private mortgage insurance. So that's just that insurance that will cover a default. So that's what I was just mentioning. The lender wants to know you've got some skin in the game. So if you've got a little bit less down, insurance is required in case of a default situation so that they don't have to just have this property that they didn't really want. So it's just private mortgage insurance.
Yeah. And sometimes PMI can be fairly small payment per month. It's not overwhelming.
It is, and so it's not something, I do have some buyers that have said, oh, I want to wait to save up the 20% so I avoid PMI, but usually when I show them the cost of waiting calculators and the appreciation that we're having right now and the amount of equity they're missing out on, it's usually not a wise idea to wait to save up because the amount of money that you miss out on your equity growth and wasting money on rent every month far outweighs and exceeds the value of saving up 20%.
Yeah. So within the contract, you're figuring out your down payment. At the very beginning of your contract, there's a due diligence deadline. And essentially what that is you as the buyer are doing your due diligence to make sure that this is a sound home, that it functions as is expected to. So oftentimes within due diligence, you'll hear inspection. So that's when you will hire an inspector. They'll come and look through the house and, you understand kind of what the process is there. Also, another part of due diligence is I would suggest maybe looking at the schools, the neighborhood, the sex offender registry, that kind of thing. Is the home in an area that you are wanting? And within that due diligence, oftentimes if you find something that you are not very pleased with, you have every right as a buyer to pull out of the contract.
And that's a really good reason, again, to hire an amazing realtor like Christie, because they're going to be able to find a lot of that information like she was talking about. You might not have even thought to check certain demographics within the location, but where you're going to be raising your family is a big deal, and you do want to know about that neighborhood and the surrounding possible challenges or the upsides, things you may not have even thought of. You may have a school that's top in state in that neighborhood, and that's even more reason to buy in that location.
Yeah.
So we also have an appraisal is going to be done. An appraisal is different than an inspection. An inspection's not always required. Highly recommended though. An inspector is going to tell you what is or isn't wrong with the home that may need fixed, electrical, plumbing, or whatever. Appraisal is just going to give you an assessment of the value of that property. So if you have put in an offer at $550,000, but the appraisal comes back at $540,000, the lender is not going to give you that $550,000 for that property. They're going to, so you're going to have to take your real estate agent and find one that's really good at negotiating, and they're going to have to go back and renegotiate the contract at that point in time. A lot of times though, the appraisal can come in higher, and that is great news for you as a buyer because that means instant equity when you close your loan.
Yep. Yeah. I've had some really rough appraisals come in, and I've had some great ones, and sometimes you can renegotiate the price or try and figure out cash over. Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about is the seller's market versus the buyer's market. Right now we're in a very strong seller's market. Essentially what that refers to is who has more options in the market at that given time. So right now it's a whole lot easier to sell a house than to buy a house. You could put your house on the market and you could get offers, multiple offers within just a few days. Whereas in a buyer's market, houses will sit for a relatively long time, and the buyers will have more power and more options in saying, hey, we want you to pay our closing costs. We want you, to do all of these things that before we purchase your house. So that's essentially what that is referring to as seller's market versus buyer's market.
One of the other key things that goes into determining whether a lender thinks a buyer is qualified for a home purchase or not is your DTI, or your debt to income ratio. So when we take your loan application, we also pull the credit report, and we're looking at how many monthly payments that this person has, or we call them liabilities, against their income that they have available. And so if someone has a car payment of $400, it's going to reduce the purchase price that they can qualify for by quite a bit because they have to make these other monthly payments. So when you're preparing to get a home loan, make sure you're not racking up credit card debt, buying new cars, things like that are going to prevent you from qualifying for a loan, or they're going to end up giving you a higher interest rate, and definitely reducing the purchase price available to you.
Yeah, I've had clients that went and bought new refrigerators like the day before we closed. Luckily, their debt to income ratio was great, so it ended up being totally fine. But my jaw about hit the floor when they told me.
As would mine, because when we do take your application and pull your credit, that's a time when we talk to you about the pre-approval process. And if we go ahead and pre-approve you, it's based on the snapshot of your DTI and your credit score and things like that right now. If you do anything during that 30 days where you've got an offer and it's been accepted and you're under contract and we start moving forward on this loan, and you do anything that affects your debt to income ratio or your credit score, you're not going to be qualified the same way that you were before. Mm-hmm. And we're going to always, every single lender will do what's called a soft pull right before we close to see if anything has changed on the credit report. It doesn't put another hard inquiry on, it just gives us an update of where the buyer is at, and it will show us any new credit or increased credit lines. Even if someone, recently, it happens in December, people get these store card offers for 5% off or 20% off if you just apply today, and please don't do that because that could, kill your loan.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the next thing, we're coming towards the end of the loan and the process, and oftentimes we'll say we're closing today, or you heard that phrase, like we're closing on our house today. It's funny because those terms are actually often switched. There's either settlement and closing. Settlement is actually when you go to the title company and you sign the stack of papers. There's a ton of papers. Either you're buying or selling, and that is settlement. When everybody comes to the table and they sign and they agree on the contract. Closing is actually when the loan has been funded and the money's been sent over and it has been recorded by the county. And that is when it is closed or it becomes closing. So it's interesting how sometimes those things can get switched.
But, it does. Yeah. It's very common.
Mm-hmm.
And also to let you know, when you're at the closing table, if you're there before 10 a.m., often we can fund the next day or settlement. So we can fund the same day if you are closing before 10 a.m. And if not, it's going to be usually the next day. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a refi, it's going to be 3 days after because there's a 3-day right of rescission on refinancing.
Yeah.
So the last piece of the basis of going into, the home buying process is your credit score. This is a huge deal. And I do teach a lot of classes on credit repair and the importance of credit because if you have just one late payment and it dings your score, that could add a huge price hit to your interest rate, costing you thousands of dollars over the life of the loan just because you missed a few credit card payments. So it's a really big deal to keep your score high, keep on top of paying your bills on time. The other thing that goes into credit scores is the balance on your credit limit. So if you have a $5,000 limit and you've got $4,000 on there or $4,500 on there, even if you've made every single payment on time, your credit is actually going to be hurt a little bit because it's called a high balance. And so the sweet spot there is keeping it at about 30% or lower. We also don't want to be paying off and closing any cards because one of the other things that keeps your score high is the length, the history of how long these accounts have been open. So the longer the account has been open, active, and positive, the higher your score is going to be. So if you pay off a card, you don't want to be closing that account. It's nice to use it monthly and pay it off monthly. That's usually what gives you the highest score. So if you're at all concerned about your credit or want to talk about ways to get your score higher while you're preparing to be ready to buy a home, also please feel free to give me a call and we can chat about your unique situation.
And any of these terms, these are things that we talk about every single day. And if you have any questions or are trying to understand the process a little bit more, call us, contact us anyway. We'd love to have a chat.
Yep. So I'm Debbie Hart, Security Home Mortgage, 801-822-8150.
And Christie Fisher with Presidio Real Estate, 435-592-3210.
Thanks.